In this episode, we're going to make the intelligence cycle feel like a practical, usable loop instead of a bureaucratic diagram that people mention and then ignore. Beginners often hear about the intelligence cycle as a set of formal phases and assume it means extra paperwork, endless meetings, and a slow process that cannot keep up with real threats. The truth is that the intelligence cycle is just a structured way to turn a vague need into a useful intelligence product. And when it is done well, it actually removes busy work because it keeps you focused on what matters. The exam cares about the cycle because it represents disciplined thinking, and disciplined thinking is how you avoid chasing noise, drawing weak conclusions, or delivering information that nobody can use. The goal is to understand what each phase is trying to accomplish, how the phases connect, and how to keep the whole loop lightweight and outcome-driven. When you can do that, you can apply the cycle quickly, even with limited time and imperfect data. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first phase is planning and direction, and it is the phase that prevents most of the wasted effort later. Planning is where you clarify what the consumer needs, what decision they are trying to make, and what a useful answer would look like. Without this step, people collect data because it is available, analyze it because it is interesting, and then deliver it because they worked hard, only to find out it does not help anyone. Planning does not have to mean a formal meeting. It can be a short conversation or even a written question that forces clarity. The essential output is an intelligence requirement, which is a clear statement of what you are trying to learn and why it matters. If you do planning well, you reduce busy work because you stop doing work that is not connected to a decision. For beginners, this is the most important mindset shift. Intelligence is not about producing content. It is about producing decision support. Once the requirement is clear, the next phase is collection, which is where many people accidentally create the most busy work by trying to collect everything. Collection is not a scavenger hunt. It is a targeted search for information that can answer the requirement. The key idea is that you choose sources and data types that are likely to be relevant, and you recognize that time and attention are limited. For example, if the requirement is about whether a specific technology is being targeted, you might collect credible reporting about exploitation trends and also look for internal signals that suggest exposure or scanning. If the requirement is about a specific adversary campaign, you might collect multiple independent sources to validate claims, then gather internal telemetry to see whether similar patterns exist. The anti-busywork rule here is purposeful collection. Every collected item should have a reason for being collected. When collection is purposeful, you end up with a manageable set of inputs rather than a mountain of noise. After collection, you move into processing, sometimes called processing and exploitation, and this is the phase that turns raw inputs into something you can analyze efficiently. Beginners sometimes skip this phase because it feels like housekeeping, but in intelligence work, housekeeping is what makes analysis possible. Processing includes organizing, normalizing, and cleaning the data so you can compare it, search it, and spot patterns. It can mean converting information into a consistent format, removing duplicates, tagging sources, and separating what is evidence from what is commentary. The point is not to perfect the data set. The point is to make it usable enough that analysis is not slowed down by confusion. This is where you prevent busy work later, because messy data forces you to repeatedly reinterpret the same things and second-guess whether items are related. A small amount of upfront processing can save a large amount of downstream pain. The analysis and production phase is where you turn organized information into intelligence, meaning you interpret the information and build a defensible assessment that answers the requirement. This is the phase people often romanticize, imagining it as a dramatic moment of discovery, but in practice, it is a careful process of reasoning and validation. Analysis involves identifying patterns, comparing hypotheses, weighing alternative explanations, and connecting observations to what they imply for the consumer's decision. A common beginner mistake is to treat the most recent or most dramatic piece of information as the conclusion, instead of treating it as one input among many. Another beginner mistake is to confuse a description with an assessment. like repeating what happened without stating what it means and why that meaning is supported. Good analysis makes assumptions explicit, states confidence clearly, and avoids overstating what the evidence can support. When analysis is disciplined, it reduces busywork because you do not have to constantly walk back exaggerated claims later. Dissemination is the phase where you deliver the intelligence product to the consumer in a form that they can actually use, and it is where intelligence succeeds or fails in the real world. Beginners sometimes assume dissemination means writing a long report, but dissemination is really about communication fit. The right format depends on who needs it and how they will use it, which might be a brief summary, a risk-focused assessment, or a set of decision points. The anti-busywork principle here is to deliver only what the consumer needs to act, not everything you know. Over-delivery can create confusion and force follow-up explanations that waste time for everyone. A strong intelligence product is clear about the question it answers, the key findings, the confidence level, and the implications for action. If the consumer can immediately understand what you are saying and what it means for them, dissemination has done its job. The cycle does not end at dissemination because feedback is what makes it a cycle rather than a one-way pipeline. Feedback means checking whether the intelligence was useful, whether it answered the requirement, and whether the consumer's needs have changed. For beginners, feedback can feel awkward because it sounds like asking for approval, but it is actually about improving accuracy and relevance over time. Sometimes feedback reveals that the requirement was unclear and needs refinement, or that the consumer needs the same intelligence in a different format, or that new evidence has changed the assessment. This phase prevents busywork because it stops you from repeating the same mistakes, like producing intelligence nobody uses or repeatedly answering the wrong question. Feedback also helps you measure success in a realistic way, which is whether decisions improved, not whether your analysis felt impressive. When you treat feedback as part of the normal loop, intelligence becomes a living practice. A useful way to master the cycle without busywork is to recognize that the cycle is scalable, meaning you can run it in a lightweight way or in a more formal way depending on the situation. If you are responding to a fast-moving event, planning might be a single clear question, collection might be a handful of trusted sources, processing might be minimal organization, analysis might be a short assessment, and dissemination might be a quick brief. If you are dealing with a longer-term strategic question, you might spend more time refining requirements, collecting broader context, and building a more detailed assessment. The cycle is not a rigid checklist. It is a pattern of disciplined thinking. The exam will often reward this scalable mindset because it demonstrates that you understand the purpose of each phase rather than treating the phases as ceremonial steps. The busywork happens when you treat the cycle as a formality instead of as a tool. Another key to avoiding busywork is understanding that the intelligence cycle is driven by requirements, not by data availability. In many environments, there is always more data than you can process, and if you let data drive the process, you will drown. Requirements-driven work means you start with the decision need, then you select the minimum set of sources and processing steps necessary to answer it responsibly. This also means you are comfortable saying that some data is out of scope because it does not help answer the current requirement. That is not being lazy, that is being disciplined. In intelligence, discipline protects quality because it keeps analysis focused and reduces the risk of being misled by irrelevant signals. This is also why clear requirements are so powerful. They give you a justification for filtering and prioritizing. Beginners also benefit from learning the difference between being thorough and being exhaustive because busywork often hides behind the word thorough. Being thorough means you consider alternative explanations, validate key claims, and communicate confidence honestly. Being exhaustive means you try to collect every possible piece of information and describe every detail, which is rarely necessary and often counterproductive. Exhaustive work can delay decisions until they are no longer useful, and it can create a false sense that you have certainty when you really just have volume. A thorough intelligence product is often shorter and clearer than an exhaustive one because it highlights what matters and explains why. The exam tends to favor thorough reasoning and relevance rather than exhaustive detail. If you practice choosing thoroughness over exhaustiveness, you will produce better intelligence and you will study more efficiently. One of the most practical ways to internalize the cycle is to imagine it as answering a high-quality question under constraints. You start by clarifying what is being asked and why. Then you gather only what helps answer. Then you clean it enough to work with. Then you reason to a defensible conclusion. Then you communicate it in a usable way. And then you learn from how it was received. That sequence sounds simple, but it is powerful because it matches how humans make good decisions in uncertain environments. It also maps to the exam's expectations because many questions are really asking what phase you are in, what the next best step is, or what action best aligns with an intelligence requirement. If you can visualize the cycle as a natural decision support loop, those questions become much easier. You stop memorizing a diagram and start applying a mental habit. To close, mastering the full intelligence cycle without busy work is about understanding the purpose of each phase and keeping your work anchored to a decision-focused requirement. Planning prevents wasted effort by clarifying the real need. Collection stays efficient when it is targeted. Processing makes analysis possible by reducing confusion. Analysis produces defensible meaning rather than dramatic guesses. Dissemination succeeds when it is tailored to the consumer. And feedback keeps the loop improving over time. The cycle is not a bureaucratic demand. It is a proven way to avoid chasing noise and to deliver intelligence that actually changes what people do. When you treat the cycle as a flexible pattern rather than a rigid checklist, you can run it quickly when time is tight and more deeply when the question demands it. That is what it means to master it without busy work, and it is the kind of disciplined thinking that will serve you both on the exam and in any real-world intelligence context you encounter.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.